Cricket, the gentleman's game. While around for more than a century, it hasn't picked up much traction in the United States. Here at the Yankee Cricketer, I'm trying to change that. By breaking down the game, explaining it piece by piece, this South African American hopes to ignite a desire among my compatriots to begin to follow the second most popular sport on the planet. So that one day, even though you may not fully understand why two players would want to play a game for 5 days, you may at least begin to appreciate it. So we will break down the game, begin to understand the rules and strategy, and analyze current headlines as well as decade-old controversies. All of that and more coming up. Welcome to this week's edition of the Yankee Cricketer podcast. Today we're going to be taking a quick look at some weird, wild, and wonderful things in the game of cricket, some weird rules, some weird outcomes, and some weird ways that we determine how people win games or how wickets are adjudged. So all that and more coming up next. Looking at the game of cricket, you may be wondering, how do we determine a winner if rain is involved? You may have been thinking this, or maybe you haven't, but either way, we're going to go into it for a little bit, just because, unlike in baseball, in cricket, we can still play a game after rain, even if we don't have enough time. In baseball, if there's a rain delay, they'll come back often and they'll just play the rest of the game, or they'll at least play until 7 innings, so that they can call it a game, and then they'll be done. Whereas in cricket, every amount of time you lose plays into what you would have done before, right? And so it makes it difficult. You can't just be like, oh, well, we'll just play 7 innings and be done, because one team bats all the way through, and then another team bats all the way through, and so you can't really, it's not fair to just call the game at a certain point, right? Because in baseball, it's one team bats, another team bats, and you just go back and forth. And as long as you've finished a full inning, you should be fine. To say, well, this team wins, sure, we don't know if they would have won, but each team had the same amount of time, so it's fine. In cricket, there's complex math involved in deciding who wins and what happens when rain is involved in a game. So the method that is used in cricket is called the Duckworth-Lewis-Stern method, and it essentially uses this idea of resources and teams' resources, so number of overs remaining and number of wickets left in hand. And those combine to create resources, and then you put that all on a table, right? And so you put number of wickets lost on an x-axis, and the y-axis is the number of overs left to play, and then that just creates a massive table, and there are numbers in every little grid there, and you can decide how many resources a team has left, and so you can use that to determine what their par score should be, or how many runs they should score to win the game, even if they how many runs they'll need to score even if they don't have a full match remaining. So if team 1 scores 200 runs in their full 50 overs, again, this is only for 50 over games and 20 over games, because in test matches there can be rain and it can be a draw, and that's fine. But in 50 over games and 20 over games, we want to have a result, right? 50 over games were invented recently, so we can't have ties, whereas the games that were invented a long time ago, like soccer and test match cricket, we can have ties and it's fine. But in a 50-over game, let's just say Team 1 scores 200 runs. Team 2 comes out to bat. They bat for 30 overs. They get 100 runs. But now the rain hits. They've scored 100 runs. They've lost 2 wickets. They need 101 more runs to win. And they want to know how many runs they need to score to win when the rain stops, right? And that depends on how much time is left, or how many overs are left to play, right? And so there's 20 overs left to play right now, but with the rain, that means there's going to be less time to play, and so they may only have 10 overs left when they come out to play after the rain delay. And so you look at the number of overs remaining, and that will give you their par score and the number of wickets lost. So the number of overs left is 20, the number of wickets lost is 2, and so if we look over there on the table, it says 52.4 on this table. And so it's the resource remaining percentage is 52.4%, which means that they need to be at, so in order right now, after 30 overs, they're at 100 runs, they need to be at 52.4% of Team 1's runs. Well, Team 1 scored 200, so 52.4% times 200 is going to be like 104, 105. So Team 2 currently is losing right now. If the game were to end right now, if the rain continues, Team 2 would lose by about 5 runs, which is just heartbreaking because they had no idea the rain was going to come. They had no idea that this was going to happen. But on the other hand, if you see rain coming, you need to start looking at this table because you need to know where you need to be. Like, okay, so at 30 overs, we need to be at 105 to win. And so essentially that's just how they determine it. That they keep updating this table, or the resource table, that they update it all the time. So the Duckworth-Lewis method is constantly evolving, but the method itself is the same, but the data and the numbers that are going into the resource calculations are changing because the game is changing. Batsmen bat quicker, right? If you were to use a table from the early 2000s and compare it with today, I'm sure they would be way different because now batters hit way harder. They in the last 10 overs, getting 100 runs is not out of the realm of possibility. Whereas, 15 years ago, that was out of the realm of possibility. It never happened, basically. And so they're constantly updating those resources, but the method itself, just figuring out how many resources you have remaining, how many resources the other team has remaining, kind of making it a percentage and then figuring it out from there. You can also do the reverse, where if Team 1 bats and their innings get stopped early, right? So let's just say they bat for 30 overs and they score 150 runs, but then it rains for a long time, and so now Team 2 has to come out and bat, and Team 2 is going to have, maybe even Team 2 is going to have 30 overs. Who knows? Maybe Team 2 only has 30 overs now. The total should not be 150 because Team 1 didn't know that they were only going to be batting for 30 overs. And so you can do kind of the reverse where it's like, okay, well now Team 2, or at that point, Team 1 had 20 overs remaining and, 20 overs remaining, and they had, I don't know, however many wickets they had left. Let's just say they had, 4 wickets lost, and they had 20 overs remaining. If we go to the chart once again, 4 wickets lost, 20 overs remaining leaves us at about 44.6, right? So then you kind of do the reverse. So Team 2 has all of its resources, right? So Team 2 has 30 overs remaining with 0 wickets lost, and so they would have a 56.6 versus a 44.6. So if you put 56.6 over 44.6, multiply that by Team 1's score, you'll get a higher score. And so that higher score will then be the Team 2 score that they need to get. So it's very confusing. If you can't really envision it in your head, that's fine. Just think of it as kind of there are resources, and the resources are distilled into a percentage based on number of wickets that you lost and how much time you had left, and depending on that they can finagle it to work into any scenario and figure out par scores. So if you ever see a score that says DL method or DL par score or DL they won by 5 runs DL method, no, that's Duckworth-Lewis method, or sometimes it'll say DLS, which is Duckworth-Lewis-Stern method. But one of the more famous instances of this, the Duckworth-Lewis method has only been around for about 25 years, but one of the most famous instances of this was when South Africa hosted the World Cup in South Africa in 2003, and South Africa was in the quarterfinals, and they needed 22 runs from 13 balls, very doable. And rain stopped play for 12 minutes. They lost that time, and so South Africa needed 22 from one ball when they came back. The revised target left them needing 22 from one. Actually, this was the 1992 World Cup, not the 2003 World Cup. The 2003 World Cup was another thing with Duckworth Lewis, where South Africa thought they needed a certain amount of runs and then they didn't communicate with the batsman in the middle. They needed one more run, and the batsman just blocked because they thought they were fine. They said they thought they didn't need to lose a wicket, right? Because in the Duckworth Lewis method, if you lose a wicket, your target score gets revised, right? And it becomes a lot harder because you have fewer resources. So the batsman thought, okay, well, we have enough runs, so we just need to stay in, and they blocked the last ball, but they actually needed to score a run, and they ended up losing that match in the quarterfinal. This one is the 1992 World Cup. They needed 22 from 13, but after 12 minutes of rain, they came back and they needed 21 runs from one ball, and an impossible target, right? 21 from one, you can't get that. And so that was the old method, the most productive overs method. And so two British statisticians, Frank Duckworth and Tony Lewis, decided that's dumb. There's no there's no way to get 21 runs from one ball, so this method is flawed mathematically. There's a problem, and so they came up with a mathematical solution. And so in that match, in that scenario, the Duckworth-Lewis method would have had South Africa needing 4 to tie or 5 to win from the final ball, which, if you look at what they needed, 22 from 13, 4 to tie, 5 to win. It's still difficult, but still doable, a lot more doable than 21 from 1. So anyway, that's just Duckworth-Lewis for you in a quick nutshell. Another way that games are determined when we don't know who the winners are or who should win or lose, what happens in a tie, essentially, is we have super overs. So Duckworth-Lewis helps us when there's rain and we don't know how to accurately determine who should win, or how to not be unfair to one team over another, and so in the occasion of ties in 20 over and 50 over games, we have invented super overs, because again, in test match cricket, we don't care about ties. Matches are drawn all the time. I have seen ties happen in test match cricket where after 4 innings, all the scores are tied, and so the time has run out and the scores are tied. So, wow, I've seen it happen like once before. That rarely ever happens, and it's very crazy when it does. But anyway, in ODI, one-day international cricket, 50 over games and 20 over games, if there's a tie, teams will go to a super over. Now, the super over in 20 over cricket kind of debuted as a bowl off or a bowl out, where 2 bowlers would come out and they would bowl at 1 wicket or 1 stump and try and knock it over. And it was essentially a penalty shootout. You would bowl, and if you hit, then the next bowler had to come and hit. And then if you hit, then they had to hit. And if you miss, then they miss. You just kind of go back and forth until one person hits and the other one doesn't, and then then you win. But I think this was very flawed, at least in my opinion, because it took something that was not very natural to the game, bowling at 1 wicket, which just made no sense, and it put everything on one bowler's shoulders. You didn't really get the batsman involved. You didn't get the fielders involved. It was just one bowler versus one bowler, which I think is people's problem with the penalty shootout a little bit too in soccer, but that's another discussion. But anyway, they did this for a while in 20 over cricket. They wanted the excitement of a penalty shootout, so that's what they had. But eventually they came up with the super over, which is kind of like college football overtime rules, right, where both teams have the opportunity to score, and whoever scores the most wins, right? And so what happens in this case is teams will send out two batsmen to bat, and they'll have one over to bat, and the bowling team will have choose their best bowler, and their bowler will come out and bowl one over, and whichever team scores the most runs in their over wins, right? So team A comes out, they have two batsmen, they bat, they score 10 runs. Next team comes out, they bat, they get the 10 runs in 4 balls, and then they win, or 11 runs in 4 balls, and they win. You have 3 batsmen for the super over. So if you lose 1 wicket, that's fine. Another batsman will come out, but then if you lose a second wicket, then you're all out for that super over. And you would think super overs, well, that's a good idea. But what happens if you tie the super over, which seems a lot more likely than tying just a game, right? I mean, tying an entire match, a 50-over match, that seems kind of hard to do. There's too many variables involved. But if you only have 1 over, it seems pretty likely that you might tie that. But apparently people didn't think about this because we got to the 2019 World Cup final before this actually happened, right? You would think somewhere along the line before a World Cup final we would have run into this, but we did not. And so if you remember last week, I mentioned that the World Cup final between New Zealand and England was probably the best one-day international match ever. Even though last week we spent time talking about South Africa's win over Australia in 2006, 438 runs to win that one, that's still probably one of the most incredible one-day matches just in totality. Just seeing the mammoth score put up by one team and then another team chasing it down is just incredible, especially in a time where that kind of hitting wasn't really commonplace. But this match was maybe even more incredible just because of the stakes, it being a World Cup final, and just how close it was. And so if we look at this game between New Zealand and England, we see it took place in 2019, July 14th, at Lord's in England. England was hosting the World Cup. And they started off slow. New Zealand batted first. They ended up getting 241 for the loss of 8 wickets. They just, again, that's not even 5 runs and over. Pretty slow. Williamson and Nichols putting up 74 off of 98. So again, a strike rate of about 75. DeGrandom and Latham 46 off 47 down the order to kind of speed it up, but still it was pretty slow. The whole game slow going, and then England didn't do much better. Bairstow and Root going 31 off 65 at less than 3 runs and over for 10 overs there. And then Butler and Stokes putting on 110 off of 130 to bring England back into the match and make it a close one. But if we look at that last over, so if we look at England's batting, right, they were kind of behind the whole game. If you kind of look at their worm, they weren't really playing very well. That early partnership set them back, and then even Stokes and Butler, they ended up playing relatively slowly as well. They picked it up later, but if you look at their worm, it's just always underneath that worm of New Zealand until the very end. They accelerate and they catch up, and so in the last over, they needed 15 runs off the last over. Stokes was still there. He took 2 dot balls in the first over. 2 dot balls, which left them needing 15 off of 4 balls in a match where everything had been slow. And it looks like it's just over at that point, right? And yet Ben Stokes never fails to disappoint. And he ends up hitting 2 sixes off the next 2 balls to leave them needing just a mere 3 runs off of 2. And now at this point, everything's flipped on its head. Now you're saying, well, 3 runs off of 2. New Zealand is dead in the water. But 2 run outs later, the score is tied, right? 1 run, run out, 1 run, run out, coming back for the second run. And suddenly the scores are tied. We go into the super over. England puts up 15. New Zealand comes in and puts up a ton of runs in the first 4 balls. Now it's kind of the reverse, right? We saw England needing 3 off of 2, and now we see New Zealand needing 3 off of 2. 3 off of 2 in their super over. Neesham gets 1 run off the next ball. Now they need 2 off of 1, and what happens? Same thing that happened to England twice in their last over. New Zealand runs for 1, tries to come back for 2 in desperation, doesn't get it, and England ends up winning the match. You may be saying, well, England won the match, but I thought you said New Zealand needed 2 off of 1 and they got 1, so that means they're tied. That's correct. They are tied. Both teams got 15 runs in their super over, but England still won. Why? England got 26 boundaries in the course of the match. New Zealand got 17. And that is how England won the World Cup. That was the rules as written in 2019. If a super over is tied, the team with the most number of boundaries will win the game. I don't know what they said would happen if that was tied. If the number of boundaries was tied, I don't know what the rules were at that point. I guess it would have been whoever won the toss. I don't know. But needless to say, people were not happy. New Zealand was not happy. A lot of the world was not happy. I'm sure England was happy, but if they were being honest, they'd probably be like, that's not a great way to win. Everyone was saying, why don't you just keep playing super overs until someone wins? Now I get the argument would be, well, you could play forever at that point. Maybe, but I don't think so. Maybe, fine, play 20 super overs, and if every single one is tied, then we'll do the boundaries. I don't know. I just think the boundaries rule kind of stupid. And a lot of people thought so, and so they did eventually abolish that in the years following, and they've now said we will play super overs until someone wins. But just a crazy outcome of a game. As it happening in the World Cup final just makes it even more crazy. And in the next World Cup coming up in 2023, I'm sure we'll be talking about it all over again. We'll see the highlights all over again. But yeah, that's the super over. That's how we determine a winner in a tie game. So we've had weird things with rain, weird things with winning games, and now just quickly we're going to go over weird things when how do we decide whether a wicket has taken place or not when there's a dispute, right? So essentially challenge calls. So we looked at DLS, which is Duckworth-Lewis-Stern method, and now we're going to look at DRS, which is the decision review system, which is cricket's system for determining challenges and things like that. It's a relatively new system. It's only been around 10-15 years, but essentially it gives batsmen and bowlers the ability to challenge calls that they feel are inaccurate or wrong. Umpires have always had the benefit of TV review or replay for runouts, because runouts are bang bang plays, and so you can always go to the review booth for that one to see, was the batsman's bat over the line in time. And stumpings too, runouts and stumpings. The umpires would call for reviews. But other than that, everything was kind of done by the umpire, and so you got some weird decisions that people didn't like. Well, not weird, but just controversial decisions that people didn't like, mostly stemming from leg before wicket decisions, right? Because that's the most contentious. It's the hardest one. It's a judgment call. The umpire is saying, I think that was going to go on to hit the wickets. It's kind of like a strike zone type thing in baseball, where you would, each umpire maybe has a different view on their strike zone a little bit, and it's always a judgment call. It's always really quick. It's always hard to say, and not always hard to say, but sometimes it can be hard to say. It can be borderline, and so umpires would give would give the wickets, would give the leg before wickets out, and often batsmen would be mad because maybe the batsman hit the ball, like nicked it before it went onto the pad, and so therefore it shouldn't have been out, or maybe they thought, that shouldn't have been out. But in today's cricket, in ODI cricket, in 20-over cricket, in Test cricket, there's the ability to review these decisions now. And so if you think you're incorrectly adjudged out, a batsman has 15 seconds to go upstairs and say, or to call upstairs and be like, hey, yeah, I think that should be reviewed. They can signal, and then there will be a review. The same is true for the fielding team. If they think they got a wicket, but it wasn't given out, they have 15 seconds to review it as well. And mostly it takes place on edges, so if a team feels like there was an edge, if they think the ball was nicked and the umpire says, nope, I didn't hear that, then they can go to the replay booth and they can check to see if the ball actually did hit the bat or not. But the biggest one is going to be leg before wicket. And so, yeah, teams will get in 20-over games, they'll get 2 reviews per innings in 20 and 50-over games, and then in Test match cricket, they get 3 reviews per innings. And so, with 3 reviews per innings, you can review quite a bit. Also, if you succeed, you'll retain it, which is good. So if you get a successful review, you retain it. Just like in football, you keep your challenges if you get them right. So players can review a lot if they keep getting it right, but often they don't. And so, and so if they get it wrong, they lose it. Now, the interesting thing is, like I said, DRS is mostly used for LBW calls, and because those are such judgment calls, they've actually come up with what I think is a really great way of kind of balancing it out between using the umpire's judgment and also still allowing freedom to challenge and not be punished. So what happens in LBW is the ball will hit the pad, and a team will appeal, and it's given out or not out, and then somebody will review if they don't like the call. And then they'll go to Hawkeye, which they've had for a long time. If you've watched tennis, you know about Hawkeye. It's the same thing that they use to judge whether the ball was out or not, ball tracking. And they do the same thing in cricket. They look at the trajectory of the ball, how the ball's bouncing, everything like that, the speed, and then they can project where the ball would have gone after it hit the pad and see, would it have hit the wickets or would it not? And so essentially, you're just looking at, for LBW reviews, you're looking at the Hawkeye and you're saying, okay, well, the Hawkeye says that one was going to hit the wickets, so that's actually out. Umpire, you need to change your decision. That you said it was not out, but it looks like according to Hawkeye it is out, so you need to change your decision. Or maybe you said it was not out, or you said it was out, but actually that ball was missing the wickets, change it. But what's interesting about this is that there's a thing called umpire's call on LBW now. And so if the Hawkeye shows the ball just clipping the wickets, or less than half of the ball, or half the ball or less is hitting the wickets on an LBW call, that's what's called umpire's call. So if the umpire said that was out, then it will remain out. If the umpire said it was not out, it will remain not out. Because the point of the LBW rule is that your pad is blocking what would have been a wicket. You're just, it's not in the spirit of the game. The ball hit your pad and, it didn't hit your bat and whatnot. You're just blocking the ball from hitting the wickets with your pads. Like, you should be punished for that, whatever. But also, you probably shouldn't be punished if it's such a close decision that just a bare minimum of the ball was going to actually be hitting the wickets. And so it's nice because, yes, the ball might have been going on to hit the wickets, so maybe the bowling team will feel like they got robbed because they got that decision right and it got called umpire's call. But fortunately, what they've done is they say, if you review something, an LBW call, and it stays with umpire's call, you don't lose your review. So you don't win, but you don't lose, you don't get penalized either, because technically you were correct. That ball was going to hit the wickets, you were right to review it, but we're not going to give it out because we're going to just give the umpire some judgment here and say benefit of the doubt to the umpire. He didn't think that one was out. He didn't think that looked egregious, and so we'll just give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. And so I feel like in baseball they could, I don't know, they could do something with that too, where, I don't know, you have balls and strikes, but again, I don't know if it really would work. But if you have balls and strikes and then you have a certain limit where, like, if a certain percentage of the ball isn't in the strike zone or is in the strike zone, you can do an umpire's call where, like, you do this hybrid of calling balls and strikes with the umpire and using technology where the umpire calls most of it. The umpire calls every ball and strike, but then if there's one that's egregious, then the computer will be like, hey, that one was bad, actually reverse that one, just like in the moment, really quick. But then you can still have umpire's call where, like, yeah, actually some of that ball was in the strike zone, but I can see why you called that a ball because most of it was out, so that's umpire's call. We can keep that call the same. Or vice versa, like, yeah, a little bit of it was in the zone and you called it a strike, that's fine. I don't know, so that you can still kind of keep it a little bit like umpire's judgment, but then also like the egregious ones we can rectify. But I don't know, in real time, how that would work. You'd have to keep beaming, decisions down into the umpire's ear, and so that wouldn't be great. So I get why they haven't adopted it in baseball yet. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting way that they decided to kind of work around it in cricket, still keep the umpires in there as a, making judgment, and their judgment will affect the outcome, but also still allowing the egregious decisions to be rectified. So anyway, that's the DRS, the decision review system. So we've looked at a lot of weird, wild, and wonderful things in the game of cricket. Duckworth Lewis for rain, super overs for tie games, and decision review system for wickets that are disputed. And yeah, all of these things help the game of cricket move on and keep going and keep adapting, but they also help the game of cricket come to results and kind of keep the integrity of the game up while still allowing us to play through rain and play through ties and not have those egregious calls. So yeah, that's all I've got, but we'll get to some news. Looking at the world of cricket today and how it stands is we have Indian Premier League coming to a fascinating finish this weekend. Teams finishing up their last match before the playoffs start. RCB, as you can see, won their last match, clinching a thrilling victory to move up to 16 points, and Delhi will be playing tomorrow. And with the net run rates as they are, Delhi, if they can just pick up a win, move up to 16 points and pass RCB. Rajasthan Royals currently playing Chennai. Chennai 150 for 6. Rajasthan in the second innings needing to beat that to move up to 18 points and potentially move into second place, which could be a big boost for them going into the playoff rounds. Moving on to the Fairbreak Championship that we talked about last week, the women's T20 tournament, and the Falcons and the Tornadoes, who were third and fourth respectively, won their semifinals and both upset and made it into the final. Falcons batted first, picking up 151 for 4 thanks to Marizon Cap's 67 off of 37 balls. And unfortunately it was not enough. It looked like it could have been, but it came down to the final over, and with 5 balls remaining, the Tornadoes picked up that win pretty easily in the end. Sophie Devine with 51 off 35, and she got some help from Callis there, 44 off 41. Test match cricket this week, we had Sri Lanka versus Bangladesh. Sri Lanka batting first, getting 397 all out, thanks to Angelo Matthews' 199 runs, falling 1 run short of a double ton. Bangladesh responded with 465. Unfortunately, Angelo Matthews didn't get much help in their innings, which is why they finished with 397. But Tamim Iqbal did get some help, and so Tamim Iqbal and Mushfiqur Rahim picking up hundreds in that innings to take a lead of about 68, 70 runs going into the third innings. but by that point there was not enough time left, and so Sri Lanka batted out the final day, picking up 260 for 6, and just leading to a pretty dull draw in the end there. That match, and then finally looking at county championship cricket, looking at the first division in England. Currently, again, Surrey way out front, 3 wins, 3 draws, yet to lose a match, 105 points. Lancashire currently playing right now, and looking not too great against Essex. Essex in 7th place, put up 391 in their first innings, and Lancashire 32 for 5 in a match that's delayed by rain. So Essex is going to get some big points here. Expect Lancashire to fall down the table. Hampshire going against Somerset in another a match there. Somerset all out for 211, and Hampshire 95 for 1 chasing on day 2. So they're poised to get some big points here. Kent, 9th position, but already at 465 for 8 against Northamptonshire, so kind of a battle of the bottom. And so Kent looking to get some much-needed points to vault themselves back up out of the bottom 2 spots there. And then Warwickshire and Yorkshire in a battle of the mid-table. Warwickshire 244 all out, and Yorkshire lead by 9, 253 for 3 on day 2. So Yorkshire looking to leapfrog Hampshire pretty easily here after a string of draws. They also have not been defeated. Lancashire, Surrey, and Yorkshire have not tasted defeat yet, but Yorkshire just has plenty of draws. So hopefully they can pick up a win here and get some points and move up above Lancashire, because it looks like Lancashire may be heading towards their first loss if rain doesn't save them. So that's what's going on in the world of cricket. I will see you all next time.